What's up, design family, and welcome back to another episode of Fittdesign TV. So glad to have you back on the channel. Before we get started, if you guys are not subscribed, please consider doing so. We put out great content on a week-to-week basis, and it would mean the absolute world to us for you to join us along for the ride. On today's episode, we'll be comparing and contrasting two extremely popular printing methods. If you've ever been involved in the print-on-demand space, or you've done any custom manufacturing in the past, you will undoubtedly have heard of the heat transfer printing as well as sublimation printing. So we're going to be discussing how these two methods differ, where both can be applied, so how they work ultimately, what are the pros and cons of each, and ultimately which of the two is going to be the most suitable for a sportswear product. Hey guys, and welcome to Fittdesign TV. So glad to have you here. On this channel, we discuss all things sports fashion, graphic design, manufacturing, and technology. We'll discuss key topics, answer pressing questions, and provide actionable steps on starting your own product line. If you're interested in any of the above topics, stick around. You're in for a good one. First, we'll need to unpack both of these options. That way we know exactly what we mean when we refer to heat transfer printing and what we mean when we refer to sublimation printing. So let's start off by discussing heat transfer printing. What is it? It's quite simple. Heat transfer printing is essentially a two-step method where you essentially take your printed design, whether it's a logo or an emblem, and you transfer that onto a specific type of paper. That paper is then transferred onto another adhesive paper that is applied onto the garment using heat. What heat does is it'll melt that glue, and specifically it'll melt the glue under the areas of the graphic. When the glue dries up or it solidifies, this is what actually bonds the printed logo onto the garment itself. So once things cool off, the glue solidifies and you have a perfectly printed logo with great adhesion. Now that we've discussed what heat transfer printing is, let's turn our attention to sublimation printing. And it's a little bit more complex, but I'll keep it simple for you guys. Like heat transfer printing, you're actually taking your printed design and transferring it onto a regular copy paper or sublimation paper, depends on the specific facility and what they're using. And what happens then is, using a heat transfer press, you'll take that design from your copy paper and transfer it onto a substrate. When you heat this printed design using the printing press or this heating press, you turn the substrate from solid into gas, and during that process, it seeps into the specific parts of the garment, and when it dries up or when it solidifies, this is when it turns into actual printed ink or actual printed dye on the surface of the garment. And unlike heat transfer, here we actually have the garment or the dye become a part of the essence of the fabric. Unlike with heat transfer printing, where you're actually taking an additional layer of material and you can actually feel the surface of the vinyl on the surface of your fabric, with sublimation you actually get none of that. It feels like a part of the fabric. So all is well and good. We've discussed what heat transfer printing is and ultimately what sublimation printing is. Well, let's look at both and compare and contrast them and try to understand which of the two printing methods are going to be the right option for you, especially within the context of sportswear. We're going to be discussing three key categories that ultimately are going to help you stack these printing methods up against each other. The first is going to be the durability and feel of the actual printing method. When it comes to the durability and feel of both heat transfer printing and sublimation printing, with heat transfer printing, typically these prints will only last around 30 to 40 washes, depending on the size of the garment, how you take care of it, and how you wash it. Sometimes it's recommended that you wash these garments on low heat, specifically so as to not melt the glue that is bonding the vinyl onto the surface of the fabric. At the same time, usually we'll recommend that you wash these garments inside out so you're not rubbing up against the vinyl print itself. With sublimation, it's another story. Because the ink is actually fused into the fabric itself, Sublimation prints will typically last for as long as the fabric itself is lasting, with minimal fade away over the lifespan of the garment. This is a major point in the favor of sublimation printing. Next up, we'll evaluate the variety offered by each of the two printing methods. With sublimation printing, you're actually quite limited in the types of substrates that you can use, so the actual material composition that you're printing on. Usually, because of the way sublimation works, it's almost like a chemical reaction on the surface of the garment. You are limited to using polyester coated materials or polyester based materials. And even if you actually do end up using a blend of polyester, it's never going to be as vibrant. So the finished product is never going to be as vibrant as it would on a 100% polyester substrate. So this can be quite limiting. Also, with polyester or with sublimation printed designs, you're also limited on the fabric that you could print on from a color standpoint. Let me explain. When it comes to a sublimation print, yes, you can print all over the garment. You can print these crazy gradient designs that look beautiful. However, the surface of the fabric that you're printing on typically has to be an extremely light color because the sublimation ink itself won't show up as strong on anything other than either a light gray or even a pure white. This creates a problem. Number one, it limits you in terms of what types of designs you could print or what types of fabrics you could print on. If you're printing on anything that is dark, like a black or a dark gray or a graphite, you're going to be out of luck. And the last thing, I think this effect can create a very cheap looking product, especially if it's done incorrectly. What do I mean by this? A lot of these sublimated printed designs, what you'll notice on the outside are these beautifully printed designs with a lot of vibrant colors. But as soon as you turn the garment inside out, you'll notice a blank white slate. And that, in my opinion, is the hallmark of a cheap looking product. I don't think it particularly looks good. It doesn't add any creative elements to the product. So I think that is one of the major limitations of sublimation. And what ends up happening is if you need to actually print on the inside of the garment, so what you'll see some manufacturers do is they'll print double-sided printing. So on the outside, they'll print the design, and on the inside, they'll print the core color of the design, red, blue, whatever it is, to make it look like an integrated part of the design. This ends up hiking up your cost double. So what you'll notice with sublimated garments is they can still look and feel cheap because you're using almost a 100% polyester blend, which can be quite limiting, and they end up costing more than their heat transfer printed counterparts. When it comes to heat transfer printing, you're not limited at all with the types of garments, the blends, the colors that you can print on. Pretty much anything you want to print on, whether it's polyester, rayon, viscose, is definitely fair game. The last characteristic that we're going to be comparing and contrasting these two methodologies to is going to be the color quality when it comes to sublimation. With sublimation, you can actually print the full RGB spectrum. If you're printing a gradient or you're printing a logo that is only specific types of RGBs, you can get that done easily with sublimation. This is a major plus and a benefit of sublimation. However, you can also get extremely vibrant and detailed designs with heat transfer printing, and you can actually have heat transfer prints with minimal limitations regarding the types of colors that you can do. Because you're still technically printing them in a digital format but transferring them using paper, you can actually get a lot of use out of your heat transfer print. Whether you're doing a rainbow color or a gradient, or you're doing something that has a lot more colors than, let's just say, you could fit in a screen printed logo. Also, with heat transfer prints, they almost feel a bit more substantial. So you can get really sharp edges, you can look very professional, and I definitely recommend a heat transfer print over a sublimation print if you're doing small, let's just say monochromatic prints or interesting prints with foil printing or goiled finishes or 3M reflective logos. Using a heat transfer print is going to be the option for you because you can get the texture and the color out with a heat transfer print, and it gives it that, let's just say, that robustness. You actually feel the material on the surface of the fabric. If you're printing anything larger than 12 inches across and more than 3 to 4 colors, then this is where sublimation printing is going to come into play. You're going to get something that's going to be a lot more colorly accurate. And with heat transfer prints, the larger you go, the bigger risk you actually run of cracking the logo or potentially even having it completely peel off. So sublimation prints, great for all over pattern prints if you're doing like a gradient on the bodice and it's covering up the entire garment itself, or you're doing a large graphic with many colors. And with heat transfer prints, keep them small. Keep them for things like emblems, word marks, and if you want to bring in some texture or some reflectivity, heat transfer prints are also going to be a great option. Well, that is pretty much it, guys. That is a wrap on today's episode. By now, you should have a much clearer understanding of the differences in the pros and cons between both the sublimation and heat transfer printing methods. To recap quickly, if you're doing a small emblem or a word mark, heat transfer prints are definitely the way to go. If you're doing something that's more of an all-over pattern print or something much larger in scope, then a sublimation printed logo is the way to go. Do you guys disagree with any of the points I made below? Let us know in the comments, and we'd love to hear from you. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Fittdesign TV. Until next week's episode, stay awesome.